What's up, guys? We are back with another Power Rangers Lightning Collection review, taking a look at the first of something brand new for the entire line. We're not taking a look at a figure today. We are taking a look at the first Zord in the Lightning Collection. This is the beginnings of the Zord Ascension project, so of course, it's obviously going to be MMPR. So we've got our Zord Ascension project, DINO MEGAZORD here. Now this is the regular Megazord. Of course, they did that whole NFT business with the black and gold one. I will not be getting that. So we're just going to be taking a look at the standard one, the classic. And I'm pretty excited about this. It's been a little while since this went up. I kind of cooled off and forgot about it mostly. And, well, it's here now, so we're going to take a look. It does come in a pretty fancy box, and dare I say that the unboxing aspect of this was a huge part of this release, because it does have some pretty premium packaging. It's plastic free, but for something like this, I don't really think that matters too much. So you've got this sort of outer slip cover with like this line artwork for the Megazord, and then you've got some artwork on the side panels, which the artwork on this is just tremendous. I'm really happy with the actual art itself. And then the back of the slipcover gives you a shot of the Megazord in its combined form, as well as the independent Zords. You know, you've got your battle mode there, and then the little Ranger minifigures that it comes with also. But, you know, like I said, this is a slipcover. And one thing I'll note is that this slipcover is held on with like 15 little plastic, pieces of tape. So there's your plastic. I guess watch out for that. But the actual box itself is pretty snazzy. Like, I really like this. The presentation on this is tremendous. So you've got just the DINO Megazord head there. You know, this is that artwork again. There's just a big Z on the back, but it's embossed, which I do really like. And then you've got the individual Zords there on the other spine. And then when you pop this thing open, you get like a little, DINO Megazord, like the coins and where all the power crystals and everything go. So you get a little bit more to this unboxing. But the actual box itself, very happy with. Hopefully this translates to a really cool toy, but that remains to be seen. So let's do it. Let's pull it out and take a look. And here we go, out of the package, our Lightning Collection Zord Ascension project. This is a mouthful. DINO Megazord, and I'm going to do this a little bit, I don't know, interestingly, I suppose. So these are our individual Zords, of course. You know, that's the whole thing. It's the Megazord. It's 5 combining Zords to make the Megazord. But the individual Zords also need their attention, because somebody out there displays them like this, right? I mean, I'm sure most don't, but somebody's going to. So we're going to talk about the Zords individually quickly. There's not a ton to really go over. There's some interesting stuff about each one, and then I'm going to go through the other modes. And I'm going to do it in a way that I've, just sort of not seen them before, because I've just taken this out of the box. I have not transformed this. I have not combined anything. They are just fresh out of the box. I'm going to combine it into the, the assault mode, and then we'll talk about that and get my first impressions, and we'll combine it into the Megazord and talk about my first impressions there. So I want to see how it progresses from mode to mode, because there's a lot about this that does not necessarily seem very premium once you kind of get this out of the box. It does have a premium price tag. It comes in a premium box. I'm not so sure this is a premium product just based on this, because these things are fully plastic. And of course, I'm going to compare this to the Legacy Megazord. I don't have the Solar Chigoken. I never needed it because I had the Legacy and it did exactly what I needed it to do. So the Legacy for me is the most appropriate direct comparison. So we will compare it to that. And I can tell you right off the bat, there's a bunch of differences between the two. I'm sure that's, that's normal. This is a very stylized version of the Megazord, just like the Legacy was also sort of a stylized version. Neither are even remotely screen accurate. But we'll talk about these. We're going to start and we'll just kind of run through them. So we'll start with the T-Rex Zord first, and then we'll work our way through the rest. So here's our T-Rex Zord, and this is always the one that's like the standalone. If there's going to be one that really does anything on its own, it's the T-Rex, because it's a more full-featured Zord. It's just as big in many ways as the Megazord almost. So it takes center stage. And of course it's going to be the first one I talk about, because it's also got the most to talk about. But at the same time, there's really not a lot to talk about here. These things, they just seem okay. And that's kind of what I'm getting with these, is they seem okay. Like, you would never catch me displaying this set in just Zord form. I'm just not going to do it. They look they look kind of plain. They look okay, and there's definitely some stylized design going on here. Like, this is clearly the T-Rex Zord. It's obvious. There's a lot of characteristic, hallmark things about this that just scream MMPR, T-Rex, but there's still a lot of stylized nature to it. It's not as smooth. It's certainly not screen accurate. It's got a lot of extra, greebling detail on it to make it look a little bit more lifelike, realistic. That doesn't exactly make sense, but that's sort of the vibe I get out of this. It does have some articulation, but frankly, you're not going to be doing anything with these. They're just going to stand there, and that's kind of what they've always done, so that's not necessarily a negative, I suppose. You got your articulated jaw. Of course, if you go too far, you're going to see your Megazord head peeking through there, but that's normal. You've got movement at the shoulder here, and you've got a double-jointed elbow, which is needed for the transformation. It's not there just because they wanted it to have good range. It's useful for the transformation. There are thigh twists on this thing. You do have some outward flex on the legs, but you have to watch these little skirt pieces. If you go even remotely too far, you're going to shoot those things right across the room. So watch out for those. And then it's wanting to pop out already, yeah. And then it's got kick forward. It's super, super creaky though. So watch out for that. But it has this, but it's not exactly useful. And then you've got this weird double knee thing. So the knee starts in the middle of the thigh, and then it also has a traditional knee that allows you to bend fully backwards. If you want to try to get him in a running pose, there you go. And then you've got ankle articulation down here as well. The tail does move in certain spots, but this isn't exactly meant for, posing. It's meant for transformation. And that's kind of the gist with these, is that when it comes to any kind of quote-unquote articulation, it's all for transformation. It's not just so you can use these as individual Zords. They're basically here to just stand still. And I'm not going to say that in a negative sense, because they all do that. The Legacy does that. The Vintage does that. They're all that way. So I'm not taking points off, so to speak, for that. But it's just something to point out. Otherwise, the paint on this thing, where it has it, is pretty clean. The one thing that I am definitely gonna kind of harp on in this particular instance is the silver, because it's too flat across the board. It's just too flat for me. I wish it had a little bit more of a shine. I don't need it to be die cast. I don't need it to be vac metal, but I wish it had a little bit more to it. Something about it, it just almost seems like it's just going to sort of blend in. And overall, that's kind of the gist for these, is that in the individual Zord modes right now, I think they just look okay. There's nothing about these that make me think, oh, this is better than the Vintage, or this is better than Legacy. They're basically, their own interpretations. This is still very familiar territory for the T-Rex, but it is also, very much its own thing. The head in particular is where I get a lot of that stylized nature, because it just has a ton of line work sculpted in there, but there's no paint up there, except for the eyes and then the roof of the canopy and then the jaw. But there's no paint work on any of the line work on this thing to bring any of that sculpt out. So while it does have a lot of extra detail, until you kind of get it to hit the light, you don't really see it. Now, as far as our Mastodon Zord, this is probably my favorite of the bunch when it comes to single Zords in this particular release. And that's kind of weird because it doesn't really do anything. I just think it looks pretty good. The sizing, the sculpt, and it has a decent amount of paint on it too. There's a lot of this super bright yellow, the white and red accents. The silver on this one works really well in contrast to the black. So maybe that's sort of a thing with some of these, is that based on that level of silver that we've got, it's going to shine better on certain Zords than others. I think it kind of blends in on the T-Rex because it's just got that sort of pale red to mesh with, but against the black, the trunks and the tusks do look, trunk, it only has one trunk, the trunk and the tusks do look a lot shinier here by comparison. It's still the same kind of flat silver, but the contrast helps. One thing I didn't note about the T-Rex, and this is something all these Zords share, they have something pretty cool here. They all have opening sort of cockpits, so you can actually see a little Black Ranger in there if the light picks it up just right. There's a little Zac in there, which I think is pretty cool. And the actual face on this thing, the head does look good. Decent amount of paint, in comparison to the T-Rex, where some of that line work has no paint. All of, what the ears would be on this thing have full paint in terms of that yellow and the red, and then you've got more of that green and white up there. It just kind of breaks up the sculpt and makes him look a little bit more exciting. It's still a very boxy, unmoving kind of thing, Because really, I mean, while these legs do move back here, that ain't articulation. That doesn't do anything. Otherwise, though, I think he does look pretty cool. Nice, chunky little Zord, and that's probably what's doing it for me. It's a chunky, fat little Mastodon, but it works really, really well, especially with, you know, a comparatively large amount of paint detail. The Triceratops is another one similar to the Mastodon that it just kind of looks cool. It doesn't really do anything, though, and that's, you know, historically it's a thing. It's not a negative here because this is supposed to be a leg, and it's just a big chunk, really. I think it does have some pretty cool paint detail, and it does have something pretty cool that I do like about it in terms of what limited and little articulation this thing does have. So to start with, you actually have to pop the treads out, and you know, these don't roll or anything. And I will say you might struggle with this, and there's no way I was going to be able to do this on camera because they are super, super tight to actually get them to pop out and then move. But this adds some much needed girth to this thing. Otherwise, it's like just a really streamlined sort of tube almost. But this is more in line with what it actually should look like. It does have the articulated tail and the cannon. And then you've got, you know, this little like transparent red back here on the back. We do have our cockpit up here underneath the horn, which I think is pretty cool. And then you've got an articulated jaw. But you've also got, you know, this is where it starts to articulate to be the foot of the Zord, this piece here, but it allows you to rear the head up, and it has a ball joint. So it does allow you a little bit of articulation, and, you know, I have to, you know, stress little articulation. But being able to do that with this Zord does add a little bit of character and a little bit of flair to it. It's not the greatest thing ever, obviously, but it's a little bit something extra to make it be able to just do something rather than just sort of sit with its head straight ahead. Paint on this thing is okay. If there's one Zord I have that has any kind of paint issues, it's definitely this one, especially around like the eye right here. Like I've got some white, you know, slop over here. I can acetone that off. It's not a huge thing, but at the same time, this thing's expensive. It shouldn't have this kind of problem. The yellow and the white for the most part is okay, but you can see the seam line through it. And this is another instance of that silver being just okay. It doesn't necessarily contrast like the Mastodon does for me, but it looks pretty good. And the sculpt on it's okay. Sizing is all right. It's obviously not the biggest Zord. It's not the smallest Zord either, but I do like some things about it. I like the fact that these pop out, and I love the fact that it is able to do this. As small and sort of inconsequential as this movement is, I do think it helps to just add a little bit of character to it if by chance you wanted to leave it like this. Sabertooth Tiger is kind of more of the same, but it's a little bit different at the same time because it has more articulation than some of the others, and I'm sure you can understand why. It's just because it has actual legs. This is getting us into the territory, though, of being able to see a lot of what's going to become, I believe anyway, hollow pieces on this figure, on this Zord, because you can see, you know, this thing has hollow legs. And again, I know that was a lot of folks' sticking points with this thing, is that a lot of stuff is hollow, and it's not fully sculpted, it's not fully plastic, it's got some hollow pieces to it, which definitely removes a little bit of that sort of premium feel of this thing. I'm not so upset about it right this second, but we'll see what happens once we get it into an actual, you know, combined form. I don't necessarily like this aesthetic, but I'm never going to leave it like this either. As far as articulation goes, you know, you've got movement at the shoulder. You've also got movement at the knee here for the legs. Same on the back. So you've got more articulation, but it's not all that usable. Like I say, it has more articulation, but it's not all that useful because you can't exactly do a whole lot with it. You've got this pivot at the mid-torso here. I'm assuming this is part of, you know, the combination. And then you've got articulating neck, and you've got a ball joint at the head as well to afford some movement. You've also got moving tusks or teeth rather, and you've got a moving jaw here, which of course, you know, makes sense in terms of this particular Zord. And you've got the swiveling tail with, you know, your transparent piece up there. You'll see it when we fully transform this thing. I do think the color's all right. It's a nice bright yellow. And then what paint accents it does have, you know, here's the cockpit on that one, on the head. What paint accents it does have are okay. I don't really have any issues to speak of like I did on the Triceratops. This is pretty good. Sculpt is okay, but I'd still like to see a little bit more line work actually be painted in some way. And maybe that's asking too much. I don't know that it is because of what I paid for this thing. but it looks okay. You know, that red and the white and the black really stands out against that yellow, especially because it's framed by that white. It makes it pop a little bit more. And I do like this one. You know, the Sabertooth Tiger's an alright Zord. It's a decent entry. It's not my favorite. I'd say, you know, it's going to be the Mastodon for sure when it comes to individual Zords, but I think this one works pretty well. Again, I just don't expect in any situation will I ever display it like this. And then last but absolutely least, we have our Pteradactyl Zord. And I mean, this one is always like the afterthought to me because it doesn't do anything. And of course, you know, they have it displayed in the instructions as make sure you put those cannons on there for some weird feat, because this is the most ridiculous thing. Any instance where these are on the feet just make it look so dumb to me. And I did it because that's, you know, that's how the instructions say to do it. And, you know, that's what it does, but I don't like it. They just sort of clip on there. I do like the chest plate. You know, this is obviously the chest of the Megazord. So what we're really seeing here is that. I do like this sort of translucent almost shimmer to that. Does look pretty good. But this thing, I mean, as a singular Zord, this thing is an afterthought to me. It's never been anything of any count whatsoever. The head here is fairly loose. You kind of have it resting over the chest to make it do anything. Otherwise, you know, if you get it up, it's going to start to fall backwards, and it won't eventually tuck in, but it looks good. There's paint on the inside, which I find odd. Of all places to put paint, why did you do it on the spot that you're not going to see? Especially when some Zords needed it in places that you can see. You know, this is the chest, so when you actually transform it, you're not going to see any of that. So that's kind of an odd decision. I mean, I guess that does give us a hint that this is the Pink Ranger Zord, because it does have a little bit of pink. But this one's kind of, it's just a, you know, blink and you'll miss it kind of thing. It's nothing special. There's not a whole lot to it. It's literally just a part for our larger Megazord. So I've probably spent too much time on it already. It obviously does have some articulation. You know, you can take these things off and then you can actually have it, you know, fly. That's what it's supposed to do. But you're not going to display it like this, right? Nobody's ever going to do that. Now, before we get to the actual Megazord, we have to talk about tank mode or assault mode or whatever you want to call it. The mode that I have never once used when it comes to a Megazord, a DINO Megazord. I have never displayed one like this. I think it looks awesome in the show. Like, I really think it looks cool. This mass of Zords just rolling at a monster. This one is not it, though. This definitely has some issues, and mostly it's the fact that it's really evident in this particular configuration how leggy this Megazord I think is going to be, because the Sabertooth Tiger and the Triceratops just make it look enormous to me. It makes it look really long rather than like really big and bulky. It fits together okay, you know, and this is how it looks at a profile. And overall, it fits together okay. The Mastodon fits on the T-Rex really good, on the torso, and then the shoulder aspect of it. Pteradactyl is just holding on by a thread, though. It has it has these little notches right here that peg into these really weird slits on the back of the feet for one of the Mastodon's legs. And as you can see, I mean, it's not even easy to get it on. Like, it's just barely in there. It has no real clearance. So, you know, be careful with that. I do think it looks okay. Like, once I finally got it situated and in the correct configuration, because it was definitely kind of weird getting the tail in the right spot, getting the knees to be correct, getting the feet and everything to be level at the same time, took a little bit of doing for me. It looks okay. I do think it looks a little long and spindly, though. I don't think it looks nearly as big and bulky as it probably should. Again, this thing is Hasbro's creation. This thing is not screen accurate. I mean, that's obvious from the get-go. It's not screen accurate. It does have its own stylized nature to it, but I think it looks okay. I'm never going to display it like this, and I know I keep saying that, but I think I can speak for the majority of folks out there that this is not the configuration we're truly buying this thing for. We're buying it for the Megazord. This just happens to be something that it can do. Obviously, I didn't transform it and combine it on camera. It would have been incredibly clunky. Just know that it does have a little bit of issues in terms of just getting it to sit correctly. But once it's there, it's obviously there. Like, it's not moving now. Once I finally got it, it's there. It's going to stay in this configuration. The waist and the tail and the knees and the feet, all on the T-Rex in particular, I should say, really work to hold this thing together. That's where all your structure comes from. The only real issue is the Pteradactyl. I feel like it's going to fall off if you look at it the wrong way, and it's just a weird connection point. I mean, it's not unheard of, but it's just kind of weird, and there's not a whole lot of clearance on those things. Otherwise, it's okay, but of course we have to do the real combination, we have to do the real transformation, and let's actually talk about the Megazord. But this is where it all matters, right? The final combination, the actual Megazord, and I have kind of harped on a few things in this video that I'm not a big fan of. You know, I'm not a big fan of most of the individual Zords. I think they are pretty basic looking, like they really aren't all that exciting. The Mastodon still looks really awesome, but the rest of them are okay. Tank mode, I think, is a bit of a mess. It feels okay, it looks alright, but it also doesn't look alright at the same time. It very much seems to be a little bit off. This, of course, is Hasbro's Megazord, so it's not screen accurate, and nor is it intended to be. So I'm not going to, you know, quote unquote take points off for that. They're making their own stylistic interpretation, just like the Legacy is not screen accurate either. You know, they're very much their own thing, but it's all the hallmarks are there. You know, this is obviously the DINO MEGAZORD, and I think for the most part, this kind of fixes some of the problems I have with the overall package. The finished product definitely seems to be better than the rest of it. It's not perfect. There are a few things I'm not happy with, but for the most part, I do think it looks pretty good. It's bigger than the Legacy. It has some cool translucent parts here on the shoulders. You know, the inside of the Mastodon has these cool translucent shoulder pads waiting for the Megazord combination, which I think look great. I like the head sculpt. I think it looks pretty solid. And then I like the patterning on the torso. It also has increased articulation. You know, again, I'm going to keep comparing this thing to the Legacy because as far as price point goes, that's the closest comparison, especially when people are still paying crazy money for that thing. This is the closest thing to that. You know, I don't have the Solar Chigokin, so unfortunately I can't do a comparison there, but that's a whole different type of figure. This, however, I think looks pretty good. It's not die-cast, you know, it's all plastic, so that's its own thing. It does feel less premium than the Legacy. I won't even begin to dispute that. It definitely feels less premium, but it still feels pretty good. It's got a nice heft to it. You know, once you get it in your hand, it feels good. It's not too light. It's not too heavy either. It doesn't generally feel like it's going to just topple over. And again, articulation. This is a big change for me. So, you know, you've got things like on the head, we've got really, really good tilt. You've got the ability to look up, look down, and then of course you've got full rotation. But it's the rest of the body that really makes the most out of added articulation here. So the arms can go all the way out to the side. You've got movable shoulder pads. You can rotate them all the way around. We've got a bicep swivel. We've got elbow joints, and we've got swiveling forearms to make this thing be able to hold the sword in more than just like a straight out position. And then of course we've also got some hand articulation as well at the wrist, just a little bit of swivel there. It does have a waist twist too, which I think is pretty wild. You have to move the tail out of the way a little bit to make this work because it's locked in between the cannons on the back, but if you move it out of the way, you'll be able to swivel that waist. You know, in a general sense, that's definitely not a normal thing. You know, I wouldn't have expected to see that. I wasn't aware that it did that until I actually got the transformation done. Now, it's got leg articulation, and this is an area where I feel like it does have a little bit of instability that we're going to have to worry about because of the way those T-Rex knees are constructed. But you've got the ability to actually kick the legs out. They kick forward. We've got a thigh cut, and we've got knee articulation. Now, the knees are weird because, of course, that T-Rex knee does this thing here. So it's a knee, but that's not actually the knee. The knee is this joint down here, this sort of the disc that's actually in there. So the articulation, you're going to have to play around with it just and pay attention to what actually is or isn't moving. But it does work, and it is surprisingly stable. Like, he does stand up just fine. I was worried that those knees were going to be a problem, but they don't actually seem to be. You know, time may tell if that ends up being an issue, but I think for the most part, I'm relatively surprised by what this thing is capable of doing. Now, is he going to be in the most super dynamic poses? Probably not, but it is more articulated than some other Megazords that you may already have. One thing that I think is pretty cool that I was kind of worried about where this was going to go. So normally when you transform the Mastodon, you just flip the the feet around and they become hands right here. And those parts are all open. Well, on this one, they're closed, and you actually take those pieces apart. Let me fix this foot here. And you've got these down here, which they are a little weird, but they add a little bit of stability. So you've got these like treads that will pop into the feet to make like a solid platform. So they are on level ground there, which I think is pretty cool. And it does allow him to just stand. Like you can just put him down and he's gonna stand normally. So I'm pretty happy with that. Again, paint, for the most part where it's applied, is pretty clean in terms of what you can see here. You know, I still have some issues with like my Triceratops head down there, like that's still a thing. And then, you know, you've got things of that nature, but of what we can see when it becomes the Megazord, I'm really happy with this head sculpt. It looks, you know, it's obviously stylized, but it looks pretty, it looks a little bit more menacing here, which I do kind of like. And then I can't get over this translucent stuff on the shoulders. It's a minor thing, but I like translucent, and it makes it look a little bit cooler, adds a little bit more depth for me. And then, you know, let's do our quick comparison here, as best I can do one with the Legacy. So here's our Legacy. You know, we'll talk about accessories here in a minute. But you can see, you know, they've harped a lot on the scale factor of this. You know, they keep saying it's 1/144th scale, which a lot of people kept thinking was like a Gundam model kit scale, because that's the scale for a high grade model kit is 1/144. It's obviously not the same. So, you know, this is the scale of a Megazord. The Megazord is enormous in comparison to a Gundam. So, you know, kind of keep that in mind. And then you've got your Legacy here to give you an idea of what we've got in terms of comparison. So it's obviously bigger. It has more articulation. They're still very similar. You know, the Legacy had stickers, which was a callback to the vintage. There are no stickers on this thing, so what you see is what you get in terms of that. I never put all the stickers on the Legacy, but I put a decent amount of them on. I think for the most part, though, I don't know if I would say it's an upgrade in terms of, you know, if you have the Legacy, you just have to get the Ascension Project one just because you need a better one. But if you don't have this one, I don't know that this is a bad way to go, because again, this thing's very expensive these days. The Legacy is super expensive now. A lot of that stuff has really shot up in price, and it does stand the test of time. It's still a really solid, chunky Zord with a lot of die cast in it. This is fully plastic. If anything, that's the big takeaway for me. That's the hugest difference here. Outside of the stylized nature of it, this thing is fully plastic. It does feel less premium in some ways, but I think it looks really good. It has more articulation. It's going to do a little bit more, not a ton more, and it's going to be a larger presence on your shelf too. So again, if you've already got this, maybe you don't need this, but if you don't already have, you know, a standard kind of Megazord, this one probably isn't a bad way to go. Now, as far as accessories goes, we actually get some, and I'm not talking about just this stuff. You know, this is the default. There is some stuff that I would have loved to have gotten also, and we'll kind of talk about that. But we get the mainstays. So we get the Mastodon head shield, which I guess isn't necessarily an accessory because it's part of it, but he uses it as one. And, you know, of course, it's the same head, so you know what to expect there. He just holds it, it pegs into the hand. Looks great. I love the idea of that as the shield. The clear excitement point here is the sword. And not only is it bigger than the Legacy, which makes sense because this is a bigger toy, but it's got the full gold detail on the inside, so that's great. And it's vac metal. Right there, you win me over at least a little bit because of the nostalgic nature of vac metal. It looks fantastic, it's huge, it's imposing, it's super, super shiny. I don't know if it makes up for how much more shiny I would want the rest of the silver on the Zord to be, but this is cool. It does help make this thing a little bit more exciting, and I mean, it catches the light so well. Like, it almost catches it too good right now, but it looks fantastic, so I'm really happy with that. I would have loved to have seen a couple other things just because of what this is. You know, this is supposed to be the big, grand beginning of the Zord line for Lightning Collection. I would have loved to have seen some more effect parts. Like, the cannons on the back actually do work. It does get used at some point. You know, those are real cannons. It has eye lasers. I would have loved to have seen something like that. But we get a couple other things. So we get some extra hands, which are pretty awesome. We get these like style pose hands, which I think are just wild to see for a Megazord. Like, these are definitely going to come in handy, I think. No pun intended. So you get two style pose hands. So you get a set of gripping hands and the style pose hands. And then the last thing that we get are these, which I could definitely have done without these. You get these little mini Rangers. So, you know, you can pose them down around your Zord, which I guess they're kind of cool. They kind of harken back to like Micro Machine stuff for me. That's kind of what I think about when I see these. They have no detail as far as paint on them, but they are individual. So they have some of their signature poses. When it comes to the specific Rangers, you can pretty much tell who's who, outside of the fact that they have their unique colors. So this guy does come with a handful of accessories. It's not a ton, but I think what we get is pretty impactful. Like, I'm really happy with the shield. Of course, that was already discussed, but I really love the sword, and I really like these hands. I like the idea of a style pose hand for my Megazord, just to give it a little bit something different if you don't want to have both of these in use at the same time. So yeah, overall, I'm pretty happy with this. Granted, I will say I'm happy with it now that it is fully transformed. And you know, that's kind of why I did this review this way, where I talk about each section for the first time. I legitimately had not transformed this until doing this video. So the individual Zords, they're okay. Mastodon is my favorite. The others, they're okay. They do seem a little bit cheaper than you might expect them to. They certainly aren't, you know, kid level in terms of, you know, your 5-year-old kid getting some Zords, but they don't stack up to the legacy. Tank mode, kind of a mess, not a big fan of it. Looks okay, holds together okay, but something doesn't seem right. But the combined form is where it's at. The full Megazord, it definitely looks better. It's taller, it's bigger, it has some stylization to it that I actually do like with that transparent plastic. I like the head sculpt, and I love the added articulation. Is it the most groundbreaking thing for a Megazord ever? No, it's not going to put it in the most dynamic poses you can think of, but it's going to do more than just stand there. You do have the ability to actually pose this thing a little bit, which on its own is a helpful factor to this particular toy. I like the accessories it comes with. I wish it came with a little bit more. And then, of course, it does come in a pretty snazzy box. So it is a fairly premium product, but I think it isn't full premium until it actually gets fully combined. You're probably not going to want to display this thing in any other configuration than the Megazord. So that's going to do it for this look at the Power Rangers Lightning Collection Zord Ascension Project Megazord. Let me know what you guys think. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and until next time.